Good morning, everyone. My name is John Randall, and I am the Vice President of Product Marketing here at CoSecure. We are very honored to have Mike Osterman with us this morning, but we are just at the top of the hour, and so we're going to give everyone a couple of minutes to join us. We do have a few handouts in the GoToWebinar panel if you want to take a look at those before we kick off the presentation. So again, give us a couple minutes for last minute attendees, and then we'll get started. Thank you. Hello again, everyone. John Randall back again from GoSecure. Thank you very much for joining us this morning for our presentation on going beyond traditional security. I've actually had the honor of doing a number of presentations like this with Mike Osterman, and Mike always brings a very unique perspective to security, which is why I enjoy doing these presentations with him. So without further ado, I am going to have us start the presentation and let Mike run with this. And Mike, just let me know when to switch slides for you, just so we can keep this thing moving. But otherwise, without further ado again, here is Mike Osterman.
Very good. Well, John, thank you so much, and thank you for everyone here who's here on the webinar with us today. We'll be discussing a lot of important security issues, going through a lot of the research that we've done recently on the topic, and we'll look forward to your questions and comments throughout the webinar and at the end of the formal presentation. So just a little bit about Osterman Research. We're an independent market research and consulting firm, and our focus is primarily on security and archiving as they relate to the way that people communicate or collaborate in the workplace. We do a lot of primary research with our own panel and other panels. The company was founded in 2001, and we're located in Western Washington. So next slide, please. So one of the things we've been investigating for a long time is really how effective current security measures are against the threats that are hitting organizations, whether it's phishing or ransomware or other types of malware, business email compromise, and so forth. We really want to understand, how effective are the current technologies, cloud-based solutions, whatever organizations are doing, how effective are these things against key threats? And as you can see here, in terms of protecting end users from ransomware and protecting end users from malware infection, as well as eliminating successful account takeovers, the majority of the IT professionals and the security professionals we've surveyed think that their organizations are doing a decent job. They are doing this well or very well. They're able to stop a lot of these threats. They're able to prevent them before they reach end users in many cases and so forth. The problem is when we get into things like training, preventing BYOD incursions, protecting data that attackers are looking for and so forth, we find that organizations are self-reporting that they're really not doing a very good job. The majority consider they're really not doing very well. These things are getting through to end users. Users are clicking on phishing attempts. Endpoints are getting infected. There have been a number of major ransomware outbreaks and so forth, even though organizations think they're doing a pretty good job at ransomware. So on balance, what we've been finding, and this is consistent with research that we've been doing over the years, organizations just aren't doing a very good job. And it's not for lack of trying. It's simply because we're up against a very nefarious enemy that's very well funded. They test their incursions against various security solutions that are out there, and in many cases the bad guys are winning. They are getting the upper hand in a lot of organizations, and things are just not going very well. If we can go to the next slide, please. In terms of incidents that have occurred over the last year, what we found is that almost a third of organizations reported that some sort of sensitive or confidential information was accidentally leaked through email. Now, this might have been, a hacker getting in. It might have been somebody sending to the wrong address and so forth. But we find that close to a third of organizations have lost information. They've been breached in some way simply through accidental use of email. We also found that a lot of organizations, in terms of CEO fraud or business email compromise, had one or more of their lower level employees successfully tricked. So, for example, if somebody in the HR department receives an email supposedly from the CEO of the company saying, "Hey, I need all of our W-2 information," that information was accidentally breached. We also found that an external phishing attack successfully stole user credentials in 28% of organizations. A phishing attack was successful in infecting systems with malware in 24%, and the list goes on and on. And what we also find is that for a lot of organizations, they report that they haven't had any kinds of breaches. In the latest survey that we did, 19% of organizations said none of these things on the laundry list of problems actually occurred in our organization. And we think that number is a little bit high, that more organizations have been infected than are actually telling us. And one of the big reasons for that is dwell time. A lot of organizations are infected and they don't realize it. According to a variety of sources, today the average dwell time is about 75 days, meaning that from the time an organization gets infected, a hacker breaks in, there's some sort of a data breach, it's going to be an average of 75 days before they actually find out about it. And so that leaves about 2.5 months for bad guys to poke around networks, steal data, understand the normal processes in an organization so that they can send out a BEC attempt, for example, to initiate a fraudulent wire transfer and that kind of thing. So when organizations tell us they haven't been infected, a lot of organizations just may not know. So the number that have been infected is probably a bit higher than what's actually been reported. Next slide, please. We also asked about the top 10 concerns that organizations experience, and there are actually more concerns than this, but these are those that made it actually into the top 10 list. We find, not surprisingly, that about 3/4 of organizations are really worried about phishing attempts. These are very common, and particularly as more organizations move to Office 365, we're going to see more and more phishing attempts aimed at that platform. Things like, there are some emails being held up in your account. Some emails didn't get through. You've got, something is wrong with your account, and they're basically asking for login credentials so that users who are tricked into this will click on a link, enter their username and password, and now the bad guy has access to a valid Office 365 account that they can then use to send information internally within a company, externally, and so forth. We also find that decision makers and security teams are really concerned about employees that just can't detect phishing or social engineering attacks. Now, quite often these are easy to detect. There are spelling errors, the grammar is off, and so forth. But in many cases, these are actually quite easy for bad guys to get through, and quite easy for users to click on because they are really pretty well crafted. Organizations are pretty concerned about things like zero-day exploits, ransomware attacks successfully infecting endpoints, targeted attacks, and so forth. And with regard to ransomware, again, going back to a previous slide that showed that most organizations think they have a handle on this, we've seen a huge incursion of ransomware into the government space this year. Lots of governments, particularly last year and especially this year, have been hit very hard with ransomware. City of Atlanta, City of Baltimore, Jackson County, Georgia, lots of government entities have been hit with various types of ransomware. There were 23 attacks on various governments in Texas over a weekend just a couple of months ago. So this is a very serious issue that supposedly went away in 2017, the first part of 2018, but has made a real resurgence. And I won't go through the rest of this, but there are lots of things that decision makers are really quite concerned about. Now, in terms of concerns about internal threats, there are some major concerns here as well. For example, 53% of security teams are concerned or extremely concerned about just a negligent or careless employee, somebody who's maybe rushed in their job, maybe is a little bit gullible, isn't skeptical enough about stuff that they receive in email, and they'll do something silly, like they'll send out a file that's unencrypted, or they'll send it to the wrong party, or they'll respond to a BEC attempt, and so forth. We find that 47% of security teams are really concerned about, credential theft, gaining access to a corporate account, and then allowing somebody to pose as the identity of the compromised user. Account takeovers are really very common. And again, if you're using Office 365 or some other cloud-based account, and all you have is a username or password, you're not using multi-factor authentication, for example, it's actually quite easy to get tricked into revealing your login credentials. 36% are concerned about malicious, disgruntled employees, people who are intentionally stealing data because maybe they just got terminated, or they got passed over for a promotion, or they got a poor review from their manager. And also 22% are concerned about collusive employees, those that are knowingly working with an external threat actor to do something nefarious within the organization. So external actors are really quite a serious threat for most organizations, but so are the internal ones, and security teams are actually quite concerned about them. Now, in terms of security tools that are in use, we find that these are all over the map. For example, the vast majority of organizations will have some sort of AV or anti-malware solution installed on endpoints, laptops, desktops, and so forth. Most organizations are using threat intelligence feeds or block lists of some kind. A lot are using cloud-based secure email gateways and so forth. So we do find a lot of solutions in place. Most organizations are using various types of layered defenses. One thing that's interesting, though, is in this survey we asked, what do you currently use, and what would you really like to be using? What do you think you need to bolster your security defenses? And as you can see toward the bottom of the graphic here, there are a lot of organizations that would like to be using cloud application security brokers or CASB solutions. Lots would like to be using cloud-based EDR solutions but that aren't. Lots would like to be using cloud-based secure web gateways, and they aren't, and so forth. So we find a disparity between what organizations have currently implemented and what they would like to implement. Now, for example, up at the top of the graphic, we see that fewer organizations would like to use endpoint-based AV or anti-malware solutions than currently are, in large part because it's difficult to manage lots of different endpoints with on-premises infrastructure and so forth. So we do find this disparity, and organizations over time are adjusting their mix so that they're getting it the way they want. But today, there are a lot of organizations that just aren't using exactly what they want from a security perspective. Now, in terms of security budgets, what we found is that budgets are continuing to increase for both smaller and larger organizations. And we have found this consistently over the years, that every year organizations are spending more and more on security. We find very few organizations that are actually spending less on security over time. And what we also found is that comparing 2018 to 2019, smaller organizations are not only spending more in 2019, but they're also spending more on a per employee basis. And what that points out is sort of the perennial problem with regard to smaller versus larger organizations. Smaller ones just have fewer employees over which to spread the cost of the security infrastructure. And so they're actually spending a lot more, and unfortunately, they can afford less. And so smaller organizations, particularly churches and school districts and small manufacturing companies and so forth, run into a lot of problems from a security perspective because they just don't have as much available. They don't have as many cloud solutions. They don't have as much on-premises infrastructure and so forth, and they tend to be more vulnerable. Also, they don't have the in-house staff to be able to deal with these security problems, and so they tend to be more vulnerable because of that. We also found that organizations would like to be using artificial intelligence and machine learning technologies to a much greater extent than they are today. For example, we found that in terms of organizations that are currently using AI and ML, it's actually pretty low. A lot use these in their technology solutions on a frequent basis. Some use it in every solution that's out there. But the use of AI and ML is actually underutilized today, and organizations, security decision makers would like to use these technologies to a much greater extent. Now, part of the problem here is that security teams tend to be, fairly strapped for time. There just aren't enough people. It's difficult to find the right people. And so a lot of security decision makers are looking to the use of artificial intelligence and machine learning as a way to compensate for the cybersecurity skill shortage and basically the lack of budget they have to afford more people to analyze threats and deal with them on a regular basis. We also found that some key capabilities are really pretty seriously lacking in organizations. For example, we found that 28% of organizations don't have the ability to identify which email account has been compromised. And so if there is an account takeover, if an employee has been fooled, for example, through a phishing attempt, and they've revealed their login credentials, organizations don't know which email account has been compromised until something bad happens. We also found that about a third of organizations have the ability to detect internal threats or don't have the ability to detect internal threats post-delivery of an email attack. So if something bad happens, a data breach, for example, a lot of organizations just don't have the ability to detect that. We also found that 37% of organizations do not have the ability to immediately remediate some kind of an incident, such as removing malicious email from a victim's inbox. And finally, about half don't have the ability to immediately prevent internal threats from being delivered to a victim's account. So here, we found that there are really a lot of gaps in the technology and process available for organizations. They just don't have what they need to block a lot of these threats, to detect threats after they've occurred, and so forth. Now, in terms of things getting better, getting worse, staying the same, we have asked this question for a long time. And this is the results from the most recent survey you're seeing here are pretty consistent with what we found over time. For a lot of organizations, things are improving. Phishing attacks reaching end users are dropping off. Malware infections on the network are not as frequent as they were, and so forth. But as you can see here, for a lot of organizations, things are either just not getting better, or they're getting worse. Particularly with regard to phishing, we found that close to a third of organizations find that the phishing problem is getting worse. More of this stuff is reaching end users. More users are clicking on links and so forth. And so across the board, we found that for a lot of organizations, things, despite the expenditures on security and staff and so forth, things just aren't getting any better. And that reveals a problem in the overall security infrastructure that most organizations have, and perhaps in the way of thinking about security that organizations need to address. One of those problems relates to triage and remediation. What we found is that 59% of organizations can perform triage on some sort of security incident in less than a day. But that means about 41% can't do it in less than a day. It takes 1 to 3 days, 4 to 7 days, or longer in many cases. We also found that numbers for remediation are actually worse. Only 39% of organizations can perform remediation on some kind of a security incident in less than a day. So that means that for 61% of organizations, it takes at least a day, and in many cases, it takes quite a bit longer than that to remediate the problem. And given that bad actors tend to be very quick in what they're doing once a breach is started, in many cases, the cat's out of the bag. That the bad that has already happened, is just completely undetected. It's unremediated, and organizations, really do need to have better tools around triage, better tools for remediation, because the current state of affairs is actually quite poor. So in terms of next steps, and there are a number of steps that we would recommend for organizations in dealing with security issues, focus on the board of directors or senior management if your organization doesn't have a board. It's important to get them on board, if you will. And we have found that over time, and we've been doing research with boards of directors for quite some time, we do find that things are actually getting better. That a lot of organizations now are insisting that there be a CISO on the board of directors, that they spend every board meeting discussing security issues, whether it's the risks that organizations face or it's the remediation plans that are in place, how to make things better. We do find that boards of directors are taking these things very seriously, in large part because of the very well publicized breaches that have been out there. We see breaches like Equifax and Target and so many other organizations that have been hit. But we also find that breaches occur in smaller organizations and to a lower extent, just really pretty much on an everyday basis. And so organizations really do need to focus on the board as driving the security decisions for the rest of the organization. You need to understand the risks. A lot of organizations underappreciate just how impactful phishing can be, or BEC, or ransomware. And they need to fully understand the risks that they face, really across all of the businesses that they operate, across all of the devices, all of the applications that they're using, and so forth. They need to take a risk-based approach and define what is the most risky thing that can happen within the organization and focus on those things first. They basically just need to prioritize what the risks are so that they can address the lowest hanging fruit first and the most serious problems for the organization. They need to analyze what's in use. And we find that a lot of organizations don't really do this all that well. They have a lot of personally owned mobile devices, laptops, and so forth that are touching their data assets on the corporate network, and they don't have a good idea of all of these devices that are out there. They need to have a really good idea. They also don't have a great idea about all of the cloud-based applications in use. There was one survey that came out recently that found that the typical large enterprise has about 1,200 different cloud applications in use, and more than 90% of those are not enterprise ready. And so those could leak data. They could allow bad actors to get in and steal data. A lot of organizations may allow employees to download games or copycat applications onto their mobile device, and those will allow bad actors into the corporate network. Users need to be trained properly, and we've seen a lot of interest in security awareness training over the last few years. More organizations are really taking this quite seriously and training users to make them the last line of defense so that they won't be quite as gullible when they see a phishing attempt. They'll be less likely to click on a link and so forth. You need to focus on the endpoint. A lot of organizations want to do things just in the cloud or at the gateway or at the server level, but you also need to focus on the endpoint and ensure that that is protected as another layer of defense in your security infrastructure. Again, and getting back to triage and remediation, that's got to be faster. You've got to be able to detect and address these threats as quickly as possible. Also, we recommend creating communication back channels. For example, if the CEO supposedly sends an email off to the chief financial officer or somebody in the HR department and requests a wire transfer or W-2 information or other kinds of sensitive information, there needs to be a back channel so that those individuals can call the CEO on a mobile phone, for example, and particularly if they're out of the office, on vacation, traveling, and so forth. A lot of organizations don't do that. They'll respond, the individual that receives this email will simply respond back by email. And if the bad actor has compromised an account, they'll say, yes, of course I sent this. Please go ahead with the wire transfer or the transfer of data. So those communication back channels need to be established. And part of that, too, is the corporate culture. You need to have a corporate culture that will support a lower level person within the organization challenging an email supposedly from the CEO saying, hey, did you really send this? A lot of organizations don't have this, but they need to. And finally, secure your cloud accounts. A lot of organizations don't have a good handle, as I mentioned, on all the cloud accounts that are in use. Those need to be secured, not only from an access perspective, but also from the perspective of the fact that they store corporate data that's somewhere out in a cloud account that IT very often doesn't have access to. So in summary, security, as we all know, is becoming a much more difficult problem over time, and it's much more difficult to solve for a variety of the reasons we've discussed. Current approaches just in many cases are not working as well as they should. Bad stuff is still happening. Data breaches are occurring. Bad actors are still able to infiltrate corporate networks and so forth. And so fundamentally what we need is a new paradigm. We need to address evolving security problems in a different way if we hope to get the upper hand on them. So, John, that concludes my part of the presentation. I'm going to hand the floor back to you.
Perfect. Thank you very much for that, Mike. And as always, very, very insightful. Like I mentioned, Mike and I have done a number of these over the course of the years, and it's interesting to see the data points that do change, some that don't, but reality is things continue to change, things continue to evolve, and as we deal with these nefarious actors, I'm hoping a lot of organizations are finally getting to that. It's no longer a case of if I'm going to be breached, but when, because I think that is a reality that we live in today. So from a GoSecure perspective, Mike brought up a lot of points here and a lot of realities about what we're dealing with today. And this is our trend slide, and a lot of it ties in directly with what Mike was talking about, whether it's phishing, malicious insiders is definitely a growing threat, ransomware. Just the level of complexity that you're dealing with and trying to protect your organization today is only increasing. It's not going to decrease and hasn't for many years and probably won't for the foreseeable future. And for a number of years, we address this with new technology. If you go to any of the major shows like our RSA or Black Hat, you'll see a lot of new technologies. But many organizations are coming to realize that technology is not necessarily the answer. It's got to be something else beyond just another new shiny piece of solution out there. And part of this is because what we call the cybersecurity evolution, organizations have to understand where they are today. Part of what Mike was talking about is taking a risk-based approach, but that is also a certain level of security maturity. So if you look at the evolution of security, and I've been in the security and technology space for over 25 years. I've been an implementer, I've been a director of IT, and I've walked through this, I've worked through this, I've lived through this. In the very beginning, we were very passive because that was effective. We could put on antivirus. You could implement a basic firewall while everything was denied in other than maybe SMTP. You had a gateway, whether it's email or web. So you had some very basic technologies that were completely passive and reactive to what's coming in. But again, against the attacks we had at the time, they were completely sufficient. But as the attacks became more advanced and sophisticated, your defenses. And so we moved on to better technologies. We had next-gen firewall. Our AVs started adding heuristics into this. We moved certain technologies out to the cloud to get better capability and scalability. So we became less passive, a little bit less reactive, but still things were happening, things were getting through, and that's leading us to either our trend slide or a lot of the things that Mike just talked about. And that gets you to, what do I need to do today? And this means today you need to become active. If you want to address the triage remediation, like Mike mentioned, you need to be reactive. You need, or be active, pardon me, you need to be very active about what's going on here and get ahead of it, understand it. But this is a very different level of security maturity for a lot of organizations. And so we still find a lot of organizations are at that security 2.0 stage, but they're recognizing that they might need some help to move forward. And so all of this leads to, well, how do we get here? What was the reality of this? And the reality of it is, to protect against today's attacks requires you to have a lot of expertise. And not many organizations can do this. Some of GoSecure's largest customers are some of the largest banks here in North America. They have the teams. When you have 600 people in your security team, you can address everything on this list, and you can have groups that do each one of these independently and have that channel of communication. But very few organizations have that. But in order to protect yourselves at some level, you need all of this, whether it's for detection, whether it's for triage, whether it's for remediation, forensics afterwards. All of this is necessary today to protect your organization, but so few companies have this capability in-house. So they're looking for ways to address this and address it quickly. And over the course of the last 10 or 15 years, we've seen a move towards managed, asking for somebody outside your organization for help. We saw a lot of this, for example, when organizations first brought on a SIEM, and it was supposed to be the panacea and fix everything because you could collect all your logs. Next thing you know, you have this massive log collector and nobody knew what to do with it. Or the one person who did was either on vacation or left for a different job, and all of a sudden you were stuck with a log collector generating information. What do I do with it? So over the course of the years, we've seen the growth of management, and this led to the rise of the managed security services providers who were taking on things like event management, taking on things like hardware management. You might have 25 different locations, each one with a Palo Alto firewall. How do you manage all 25 of those? You use an MSSP. Your MSSP can look at your SIEM and say, hey, here's some events that are interesting. You might want to take a look at this. Ultimately, what we're talking about here is taking advantage of this expertise that was available to you to address some of the security expertise internally, the challenges that you had. And we see an increase in that, which has led us to today where we're talking about managed detection and response, not just managing my devices. You have lots of organizations that can still do that, but as Mike mentioned, focus on the endpoint, focus on what's happening, what drives out from there. If a user is compromised with their credentials via a phishing attack, are those credentials now being used in a different way on that endpoint than has ever been done before? Or are they being used potentially, if it's an admin account, to move laterally? This is all driven by activity starting from an endpoint that's now behind your firewall. So that perimeter, that virtual perimeter we have now is completely unused. So it's a shift that we're seeing in organizations, and many are saying, okay, I don't need another technology. I need somebody to either help me keep the technologies I have operating in maximum effectiveness, or I need something else completely. And so what GoSecure has offered to the market, and is offering to the market, is what we call our managed detection and response solution. And what we believe is different about ours is that it does provide capabilities across 5 distinct channels, if you will. So we have the next-gen AV, as Mike talked about. A lot of organizations have traditional antivirus today, but they're even questioning, do I need that today? And the reality is a lot of them are moving to next-gen AV, because not only does it cover the use case of the traditional AV, let's block known malware, but it does deal with some of the more advanced ones that are dealing with in-memory or fileless attacks. We have endpoint detection and response, which goes to a complete new level above beyond next-gen AV. That popped up a couple of times in some of Mike's research is, I need something that can take a look at all of this disparate activity and then be able to tell me if A and B happened, is this really bad, or are they both just benign? I shouldn't worry about it, which is beyond the capabilities of the next-gen AV, gives you a different level of insight. Network detection and response, that endpoint now that might or might not be breached is doing things laterally in your organization, which may or may not be completely normal. How do you understand that? Well, you can connect that dot back to what's happening at the endpoint. Maybe now you have contextual information that combined gives you a different view. Inbox detection and response is a huge element that we have that we brought on back in August when we acquired Edgewave. And this is addressing that post-delivery piece that Mike talked about. It's very, very important that you understand that messages are getting past your gateway, and that's going to continue to happen. It doesn't mean your gateway is failing. Your email gateway is doing exactly what it was designed to do. But things are still getting passed. And so now you have messages that are suspicious potentially sitting in the user's inbox, waiting for them to make a decision if it's good or bad. And so inbox detection response is a capability to take away that decision-making process and let the experts, the security experts, do the analysis and determine the classification. And then finally, insider threat. Mike had an entire slide based on the internal threat. And this is absolutely a growing concern that many organizations, above and beyond the primary ones you would think of, like healthcare, government, financial, many organizations are looking at this and saying, this employee is disgruntled and wants to do something, or this employee needs more money for some reason and feels they can sell this somewhere. There's a variety of reasons why the internal threat is a challenge, but very few organizations we're finding beyond those very large have any capability or capacity for dealing with this. But it's all of this that is what we have put together into a single package that allows us to help address all these multitude of concerns, as well as connect the dots across all of them. If something happens at the next gen AV level, we can then use that and add that back into our intelligence to connect with the other pieces and really create this contextual information that helps you understand A and B and C and D, always potentially suspicious and or just benign by themselves, but put them together in the right order, and now you've got a problem. That's what the managed detection response from GoSecure is designed to achieve. And when we talk to organizations, they understand the 5 pieces, and they understand that these 5 pieces are going to generate a lot of information. And this gets into my component around dealing with the detection, the triage, and the remediation. So if you have 5 different elements that are creating a lot of information, that's the event visibility that you need in order to be able to detect sooner, which then allows you to triage what exactly is happening and then hopefully point you to the remediation. But what we find in talking to a lot of organizations is that the analysis, the correlation, the response, this is where the challenges occur. Events can come from anywhere, and we can store the events in whatever, SIM, whatever you want it to be, but it's what do I do with it now? And that becomes where managed detection and response comes into play. It's taking all this information and being able to do the analysis and the correlation and come up with a response, not only an immediate remediate or mitigation response. Let's kill that process. Let's quarantine that machine. Let's degrade that insider threat activity so the user believes that they're actually transferring information, but it's taking a lot longer, or we're changing data inside of that. And then go back to the customer and say, and this is how you remediate this in the future. The entire problem occurred because of a vulnerability that was unpatched on that endpoint. So if you patch that vulnerability, none of this happens. That's your remediation plan. This is directly getting to the point Mike made about triage and remediation. Triage, we can do the immediate mitigation, block the device, quarantine the device, but we can also give information on that based on our ability to analyze, correlate, and deliver this capability back to you. When we look at the market, we look at what a lot of people are doing in this type of business, and we look at what do we think makes us different. And one of the number one things that we feel is our visibility. We have an immense amount of visibility across the 5 areas, especially in the MDR market. None of the other MDR vendors cover all 5 of those, and are also able to pull that information together into what we call our multi-observational analysis. I've used the analogy a couple of times, A, B, C, and D. But that's what our multi-observational analysis is doing, is saying A, B, C, and D are information points that are important that may have come from any one of those 5, but when you put them in the right order, they can do this. And that creates that correlation that is highly valuable, that allows us to then do that active mitigation response that we talked about. But it's our ability to do that based on our beginnings at the endpoint level and add these other information points into that. This is truly unique. And then our actionable context. This is exactly what would have happened, as well as how do you remediate that going forward. We took the mitigation response, but then how do you remediate that going forward? And then finally, our expertise in putting the platform together and then operationalizing all of this for you and working with you. That's one of the keys of our managed detection response capability, is we work with you. We understand your use cases. We understand what comfort level you have with us doing mitigation on your behalf. Not every customer is the same, so our onboarding works closely with you. And so, do you want us to quarantine devices if we see something suspicious, or do you want us to simply notify you and let you take care of it? We have that level of conversation with you. We have multiple ways, and I'm not going to cover this in much detail. There's lots of information about this on our website, but multiple ways that we can deliver our managed detection and response solution for you to meet your exact needs. So by all means, let us know if you'd like to learn more about that. So with that, that is really the end of the story presentation, if you will, as it relates to questions that we have coming in here. I think we have a few here, Mike, so let me go see them real quickly here. One of the questions they had is, what's your take on Office 365 from a security perspective, whether it's email security, which is what a lot of companies think about initially, but they're adding new things, whether it's ATP and Defender, a lot of things within the Office 365 world. So what's your general take on that?
Well, we think Office 365 as a platform is really very good. We use it internally. We think it's really a very good platform. And Microsoft has taken steps to make it more secure, but we've done very careful evaluations, and we've had an ongoing evaluation of this for quite a long time. And the security within Office 365, whether it's EOP or ATP, is not quite as good as what you'll find with a lot of third-party solutions. It's good, but it's not quite as good. And Microsoft is getting better, but so are third-party solutions. So our recommendation that we've made to a lot of companies is to say, go with a lower level plan like E3 or maybe even E1 in some cases, and then supplement that with third-party solutions. So not only will you get better security, but you'll actually save some money in the process.
Okay, good. On one of your slides, it was talking about the moving of security to the cloud, and we have a couple of questions about that. And there's lots of talk around moving to the cloud. We've been having that conversation for years now in security. But any red flags to keep an eye on if I'm moving something to the cloud that I currently do on-prem?
Yeah, I wouldn't say red flags, but certainly yellow flags. You want to make sure that you have a very solid cloud security provider. And you also need to be careful, going back to Office 365, sometimes Office 365 will recognize a third-party security solution as an invader. And so you have to be careful to choose the right third-party solution that's going to work symbiotically with Office 365 and won't cause problems. But yeah, certainly, a lot of organizations are moving to the cloud, and they should, particularly if they don't have the in-house staff to do things. They maybe need to consider managed security service providers and that kind of thing. But just be careful in doing that.
Good. In talking about the different types of attacks, whether it's BEC, ransomware, malware, APTs, all this stuff, in your research, didn't see any slides on this, but in your research, did you find that certain types of attacks are targeting specific industries more heavily than others?
Yeah, we have found, particularly if you go back to like 2016, 2017, ransomware was particularly going after healthcare organizations. We saw that a lot in the UK with the National Health Service. A lot of NHS hospitals were shut down. Some in the United States have been shut down as well. We found last year and this year, government entities tend to be the most affected by ransomware. And so it's been, it tends to sort of rise and fall in various industries. And today, the government sector is being very hard hit by ransomware. We have seen a lot of organizations, a lot of government entities shut down, for a week or more as they try to recover their systems and so forth. And it's in part because they don't have good processes in place. They don't have good backups from which they can recover. Sometimes they don't have backups that are air gapped so that they're protected, from ransomware attacks that will actually not only infect endpoints, but also infect the backups. So, it's a combination of good technology and good process that needs to be in place.
All right, good. You mentioned on a couple of your slides EDR, and we have a couple of questions here that said, we're thinking about that. We've looked at EDR, but our concern is, one, more information, can we do with it? And a little bit of what we've heard about EDR is it can give you very detailed information, but it could require a very experienced, almost a threat hunter to be able to use that. Any guidance there if we want to, evaluate an NDR and make sure we're getting best value from it?
Yeah, that's a great point. And EDR solutions are great. They will generate lots of information, but the downside, is like you pointed out, you have to have somebody that can do something with this information. So it can actually increase an organization's workload simply to process all the information. So you'll have more alerts, you'll have more information about what's going on with endpoints. But yeah, you have to have experienced people, and that's part of the reason a lot of organizations are looking to artificial intelligence and machine learning to deal with a lot of this stuff automatically, so that you can get an alert about a threat and then have it automatically dealt with, either through blocking the IP or whatever the case is. But yeah, so EDR is has a very positive upside and a significant downside as well.
You mentioned AI and ML a couple of different times, and I know here at GoSecure we talk about our use of that internally here. But if I'm a CISO today and I want to bring AI or ML into my organizations, where do we start?
Well, very often you can start with the vendors themselves. A lot of vendors now are using AI and ML technologies within the context of their solutions. So, that's already handled by the vendor. So in terms of detecting threats, remediating, and so forth, a lot of these will be handled automatically, using AI and ML approaches by the vendors themselves. Organizations can do that themselves. I mean, they can use that for processing alerts to go after the low-hanging fruit, so that security analysts, for example, don't have to deal with all of the threats coming in, but only those that pose the most serious risk and those that can't be dealt with in an automatic way.
Okay, and there's actually a question here on one of my slides, but I'd be interested in your take on it. The whole conversation of security maturity seems to be becoming, more prevalent. More and more organizations are talking about that. How does an organization, from your perspective, go about even starting that process of understanding their current maturity level versus, as you mentioned, taking a risk-based approach and then understanding based on what their risk level is, what maturity level do they need to be, and then how do they get there?
Boy, it's a great question. And it's not an easy one to answer, because I think part of what organizations need to do is really understand all of the risks out there. They need to do a really good analysis on where they are today in terms of the technologies they have in place, the cloud solutions in place. They need to know where all their data is. We find that about 5% of all corporate data is in locations that are outside the control of IT. It's in somebody's personal Dropbox folder or on their home computer, that hasn't been uploaded back to the corporate network and so forth. So you need to get a good handle on what you're doing today, where your data is, and so forth, and then look at your security solutions and determine, are they really going to be able to address the problems that we have? Are they able to address the phishing problem that we have, the problem with ransomware, the problem with other types of malware incursions? Do we have solutions in place that can address BEC and automatically stop them before they reach end users? And so that kind of thorough analysis and thorough inventory needs to be done before organizations can really decide how mature their current solutions are and which solutions they need to implement.
Very good. Yeah, not an easy answer. I know I personally have been talking about security maturity for the last 5 or 6 years, and it is very hard for organizations to understand where they are and where to go. And I think you outlined some great starting points, but keep in mind also it's a journey. I think a lot of organizations need to understand that it's a journey. It's not a destination. This is something that needs to be looked at every year, especially if you materially change the organization. If you acquire somebody else, how does that change your risk level? How does that change what you're doing today? Or if all of a sudden you grow from 500 employees to 5,000, things like this need to be evaluated at the time they occur, but as well as just on a regular basis. It's not a one and done. But again, the reality we have here as well as many organizations are challenged on a people level. They simply don't have enough. And so it's hard to prioritize sometimes. So maturity is something that I think is incredibly important. I think every organization should be looking at it on a regular basis. But as Mike said very eloquently, it's a hard one. There's nothing easy about it, but it is what you need to do for your organization, because your organization is different from the one next door or even the one next door in your industry. So you need to take a very internal look at what you're doing here. So with that, we are out of questions, and then we are getting near the top of the hour. So I think we've done our job here, Mike, and provided a lot of information, and hopefully this is helpful for those of you on the call here. We will send out a reminder email afterwards for those of you who would like to perhaps review this particular one, look for some more of the salient points that Mike brought in. We'll send a link to that. Also a reminder that we do have some handouts there for some of the GoSecure offerings that I mentioned here. But more than anything, thanks to everyone for your time. And Mike, as always, thank you very much for your insightful view of what's going on in the very interesting world of security today.
Well, thank you as well, John.
Take care, everyone. Have a great day, and we'll see you next time.